One of the chief causes of fires is an incident involving electrical equipment. In this video, we'll take a look at some of the most common occurrences involving electrical equipment, and we'll address how to work safely when dealing with this type of equipment. Let's get started. First, you'll want to inspect and maintain the restaurant's electrical equipment on a regular basis. Make sure that all the equipment is in good repair and that there is no damage to terminals and no exposed wiring. If you see that any equipment appears damaged, you should disconnect it immediately and label it as out of service and notify restaurant leadership so it can be repaired or replaced. You'll also need to monitor the condition of the electrical cords and plugs in the restaurant. Check all cords regularly to make sure that there are no bare wires or loose plugs. Also, make sure electrical equipment is positioned so that there is plenty of slack on the electrical cord. Stretching cords to reach outlets often leads to damaged plugs, torn insulation, and cuts along the cord or the appliance terminal. This is important. Notify restaurant leadership immediately if you notice frayed, exposed, or damaged wires, loose plugs or prongs, broken outlet covers or outlets. Never unplug equipment by pulling on the cord. Instead, you should always hold and pull the plug itself. Before you try to repair an item or do any kind of maintenance on the equipment, be sure you disconnect it from the power source first. Naturally, equipment that can be easily disconnected by unplugging it from an electrical outlet should be handled in that manner. If it's a piece of equipment that can't be unplugged, disconnect it by turning the circuit breaker off. You'll want to always be sure that electrical cords are dry and that they don't come in contact with water. For any outlets that exist in areas where moisture occurs, make sure there's a GFCI, that's a ground fault circuit interrupter, receptacle in place. Doing so can help prevent electrical shock. And be particularly careful that you don't overload any electrical outlets. Also be sure you don't plug in any piece of equipment that is not approved for your restaurant. Circuit breakers are also something to be aware of. You want to maintain circuit breakers safely by following these simple guidelines. Keep a 3-foot clear area directly in front of all electrical panels. Make sure panel box covers are closed at all times. Never tape circuit breakers to prevent them from tripping. And of course, be sure you report any problems such as breakers that keep tripping or breakers that aren't clearly labeled to restaurant leadership. Extension cords are handy in certain instances, but not always in a restaurant environment. Here are a few instances in which you should not use extension cords. Don't use extension cords to connect permanent equipment. Always plug electrical cords from the equipment directly into an outlet. Don't use any extension cords that have frayed, exposed, or damaged wiring. And never use an extension cord in any wet areas. If you happen to be working with or storing combustible materials such as boxes, keep them at least 3 feet away from hot equipment. Make sure all fryers are positioned directly under vent hoods. Maintain correct oil levels in the fryers and shut off the power to all fryers at the end of the day. Do not operate cooking equipment if you see that the vent hood is not turned on or if it's damaged. And remember that cooking equipment must remain under a vent hood in order for the fire suppression system to be effective. At the end of each day, you'll need to change the filter envelope and clean the filter pan in every fryer. This will reduce the risk of overnight fires starting in the fryers. Be mindful to keep cooking equipment and vent hoods free of oil buildup. Also, clean all fryers, cooking surfaces, and vent hoods correctly to prevent oil buildup. In the event of a fire, be prepared to act promptly by knowing where fire extinguishers are located and how to use them. There are 2 categories of fire extinguishing equipment in every restaurant. The first is called an Ansel wet chemical fire suppression system. This system is installed above boards cooking equipment. It's set to activate automatically in the event of a fire, and it will shut down any power and fuel supply to help control the fire. The Ansel system has a manual pull station that can be used to activate the system if the automatic feature fails for any reason. Make sure that these red rubber or metal caps called blow-off caps are on Ansel system nozzles at all times. If they're missing, Oil can clog up the nozzles, and that can lead to a malfunction. Be sure you notify restaurant leadership immediately if you notice any missing or damaged caps. The second kind of fire extinguishing equipment your restaurant has is the handheld fire extinguisher. Handheld extinguishers should be mounted on the walls in easily accessible places. There are two types of handheld extinguishers in the restaurant. First is the Class A, B, C extinguisher for dry chemical multipurpose use. These extinguishers are used on non-oil fires, such as ordinary combustibles like boxes, flammable liquids, or electrical equipment. Using a Class A, B, C extinguisher on an oil fire will strengthen the fire. Then there are Class K fire extinguishers, which should be mounted near vent hoods. These are used on oil, fat, and grease fires. The Class K extinguishers should only be used after the fire suppression system has been activated, switching off the power to all fryers. Handheld fire extinguishers should only be used if a fire is in the beginning stages. Make sure that you know how to use each kind of fire extinguisher correctly. The instructions are printed on the side of each extinguisher. In particular, be sure you know how to activate the extinguisher, where to point the nozzle, and how far from the fire you should be for the best outcome. If a fire does break out, you'll need to take action quickly. At the first sign of a fire, notify restaurant leadership. If a fryer catches fire, leave it under the vent hood so that the Ansel system can do its job and contain the flames. If for any reason the Ansel system does not go off automatically, here's what you should do. Trip the Ansel system manually. To activate, you'll pull on this ring at the pull station. This will break the thin glass bar and activate the system. And this is important. Never try to put out an oil-related fire with water or ice. If a fire starts in the pressure fryer, power off the fryer. Then unplug it and turn the power off at the breaker. Use a K-class extinguisher and dispense it until it's empty. Pull the manual fire suppression handle if the system doesn't automatically dispense the chemicals. If you find you're dealing with a non-oil related fire, you should use the Class A, B, or C extinguisher. First, pull the pin. Then, point the nozzle at the base of the fire and squeeze the lever until the fire is out. If the fire is too large or out of control, you should call the fire department and immediately follow evacuation procedures. Fires are very serious business, and they can get out of hand quickly. By knowing the proper procedures and being aware when you see something that might create a risk for a fire, you'll help minimize the chances of having to deal with a fire in your restaurant.